When I looked at where a transmission line ought to be built, without all of these layers of information, naturally I thought to myself, well, we should take the shortest route. Doesn't that make sense? I'm a farmer. When you're delivering from point A to point B, you say, well, I want to use as little gas as possible, and I want to use a straight line, and that seems to make the most sense. But it didn't make the most sense in this case. It didn't make the most sense because that transmission line would have literally had to go between somebody's barn and their house. That transmission line would have had to come down a river valley where people value the wildlife and the scenery in that river valley. And it was interesting because normally very conservative people that would likely come down on the side of development and progress and construction, when that progress and development and construction was in their backyard, they said, whoa, wait a minute here. There's some other values that we need to consider. And also some people that would be considered on the liberal side that said, we want to build alternative energy. We want nothing more than to create an energy future that is cleaner and greener. And in Montana, that means wind energy. And so when we said, great, we'll build some wind farms and then we'll build these transmission lines to deliver the wind to somebody's house or business, they said, wait a minute here, I didn't sign on to transmission lines. Yes, you did. When you said we wanted a new energy future in this country, when we wanted a cleaner and greener future, when you want to create jobs with this cleaner and greener energy future, it means you have to deliver the electricity from where the wind blows to where the people consume the electricity, and that means a transmission line. And so it brought people together. And that's what this process is able to do. Everybody's voice is heard, everybody's voice is weighted, and then ultimately we're able to move the ideas of where this transmission line will be built from a place that's not appropriate to a place that is.
We live in a time where stakeholders, oftentimes stakeholder groups, just get into a place where they're at loggerheads, and we see a lot of places where just a great division. And one of the things that I found amazing about this process is they found a way to bring together elected officials from counties and bring them and put them in the same room with what I would consider to be diverse stakeholders, people who probably don't share many of their ideological points of view, but who understood that this was a process where people were going to be listened to and where people's value system was going to be able to be articulated and then taken into the mix when the mapping finally happens. What was interesting to me is that the result of this demonstrates that you can bring diverse stakeholders together, people with completely different points of view. The earlier you do it, the better. The more you listen, the better. But if you do those things, you bring them in early, you allow people to have their say, then we still have the ability to find common ground among very diverse stakeholders. And that's the beauty of the MSTI project. After looking at this process and having done a lot of work in communities in my public life, and even since coming to Colorado State University, if I look at their process, I think they've developed could be the gold standard for us to do energy planning in the West because of the amount of input they get, the way they sort of quantify the intensity that people feel around that, and then their ability to say we can actually take into account all these diverse opinions and get to the place where we have a reasonable way of protecting those things that we care about but still being able to develop the resource. That's the balance they achieve, and that's why it's the gold standard for processes.
People need energy. As our population grows, we need new ways to address growing demands for energy. Conservation, efficiency, and on-site generation are all good first steps. But most people agree that we will also need some large-scale energy generation, and for a range of reasons, people are seeking more variety in sources for energy, including renewable sources like wind and solar. The major markets for this energy are the larger cities of the West Coast and the Southwest, while some of the best wind energy potential is located hundreds of miles away on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. And to move energy from the Rocky Mountains to the West Coast, you need power lines. Many different energy companies have proposed a variety of new power lines to move the renewable energy west, but many people are concerned about the environmental impacts of power lines, and no one wants a power line in their backyards. In other words, power lines can have considerable impact on local community values. So where will these power lines go? An Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, intends to address this question. An EIS helps identify the impacts of the proposed power line as well as alternative routes. However, they are typically very long and technical, and often may not address specific local concerns. In 2008, Northwestern Energy proposed the Mountain States Transmission Intertie, or MSTI, to move energy generated in Montana to other parts of the western United States. Response to this proposal was typical of new infrastructure projects. People were confused and frustrated. The preliminary route analysis was highly detailed and in compliance with federal and state laws, but it was hard to understand. Affected landowners and local governments did not understand the process by which the preferred route had been selected. They felt that their concerns were not being meaningfully considered. Where were their local community values in the process? These concerns led to the formation of a collaborative team of representatives from a handful of NGOs and county governments, focused on developing an independent approach to analyzing the MSTI line tailored to local information needs and filling gaps left by the EIS process. The goals of this effort are to help people better understand the need and context of the line, assess the economic costs and benefits of the line, and give people a way to have their values and concerns heard and incorporated. To meet the MSTI Review project goals, we start with 3 maps, each tackling different impacts and constraints associated with the proposed line. An engineering map, created by engineers identifying physical constraints on the line. A wildlife map, created by biologists, predicting impacts to wildlife habitat. And an interactive community values map based on input from county officials and local residents. To create this community values map, we begin by meeting with stakeholders to generate a list of community values that the power line might impact. Next, we hold an interactive workshop in which participants rank and score the community values that are most important to them and their constituents. We then use those community values scores to create a map that displays those values across the landscape. High scores accumulate to form peaks on the map. These peaks are not actual mountains on the landscape. They are peaks that show accumulated community values. Through this quantitative process, natural paths of least resistance for the route begin to emerge, the corridors where the line would have the least total effect on community values. Similar maps are produced for impacts to wildlife and engineering constraints. As a result, for each point on the map, we have the ability to identify the accumulated values that are specific to that location, which allows us to answer questions from individual stakeholders about the proposed routes.
How will the power line affect private property values?
Will the power line generate local tax revenue?
Will the transmission line affect my tax bill?
Who pays for a transmission line?
The MSTI Review project also provides concise, accessible economic and policy reports. The reports respond directly to concerns voiced by stakeholders and local governments, such as impacts to private property values, tax benefits, and policy and market forces affecting the project. Together, these maps and economic information can inform the EIS process, inform public commentary around the EIS process, and give people a way to compare and contrast all routes, including models recommended by the Community Values Map or the EIS, with a clear understanding of the values and impacts along the way. As the demand for renewable energy grows, it becomes all the more important for us to make well-informed decisions around the best way to move energy generation to consumers. The MSTI Review project is proving the value of using a collaborative, map-based approach, integrating information on community values, economic costs and benefits, and wildlife concerns.